Welcome, listeners. This is Sarah Wallace here today with
RK Ashwick.
Luna Day.
Noah Hawthorne.
And S.O. Callahan.
Today we are going to talk about the trope rivals to lovers.
Yay!
So first up, let's start with examples of rivals to lovers characters dynamics that we've written. We want to start on the line, Becca?
Yeah, so I have written A Rival Most Vile, Potioneering for Love and Profit. That is a rivals to lovers story between two rival potion shop owners. And that is all about Ambrose and Eli, who run potion shops literally across the street from each other.
So mine's actually a tiny little bit of a spoiler because I do have it. It started, but it's not kind of got to the lovers part yet. But in my So in my Threya Saga series, I have an assassin called Cain, and he has very recently in book 2 come across a rival called Renelle, and I have plans for them. But I'm not going to say any more than that because it spoils things.
Perfect.
So I'm also got rivals in the WIP I'm working on right now, and they're rival professors kind of going for the same research project, and it's kind of a race to see who gets theirs finished first and best. And I kind of border on rivals slash enemies. At one point, it's kind of like where do you cross the line? But I think most of mine count as enemies, so I'm trying to keep it more animosity and less hate.
Yeah, poor Breeze Spells. We have struggled so hard to figure out which category it fits into specifically, but I think we have settled on just going with rivals to lovers for Breeze Spells and Bridegrooms because it's been a challenge trying to explain it to everyone because we did start that story with a prompt that is... I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll say that it counts, but I still struggle to know exactly where it fits, so...
We're here for Bree Spells today. So why do we like rivals to lovers?
Well, I like writing it because it's delicious. I like just the contrast that's kind of built in, the way you can do opposites attract, the way you can explore their differences and their similarities and how they bond despite all of that. It's just very fun for me.
Yeah, it's the same. I think I do like the relationships that you can write in that way. I'm a big fan of that kind of rivalry banter between characters. But I also think there's an element similar to my answer for why we like Hurt Comfort is I like when you build all that tension and the rivals are rivaling hard and then something changes and there's a moment of vulnerability and that's when it kind of starts to shift towards the lovers element, that flip. That moment is just chef's kiss.
Absolutely.
It is so well said and so true. I think for me, it's like others have said, I don't know, I have a hard time when they already know each other or they already get along. I want them to not get along. I want them to play with each other's strengths and weaknesses and figure out how to work together towards this, because usually it's like a common goal kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to see how they get over themselves and end up helping the other person. Yeah, I think you put it best, Luna, but yeah.
Yeah, there's always that element of competition, which is, for me, it's hard because I am probably the least competitive person alive. And so I think it's fun to read it, certainly, because it's a way for me to see that competition between people without having to experience it for myself. I get to just kind of watch it from the sideline. But yeah, and I think in our struggle to define Breeze Spells, it's made me realize that I prefer rivals versus enemies a lot better because enemies, first of all, is so hard. It's just you really have to have a great reason for them to be enemies. But I feel like rivals, you don't necessarily have to hate each other at the beginning, right? There doesn't have to be some massive, just I wish you were dead, that kind of thing. There can be, but I feel like with rivals specifically, it's easier to not have it be you're the scum of the earth, you're the worst person alive. We can still just have something that we're either both trying to achieve or both trying to do and not have it be so intense and still get that ultimate romance in the end.
Absolutely. I like rivals to lovers because I think, kind of touching back on what Becca said earlier about the similarities and differences, I feel like rivals, usually they have a common ground that they don't acknowledge, but that's why they're rivals. And so I like the fact with rivals to lovers that they don't realize that they actually are very compatible, but they like start off the story at odds, and then the story's usually about them overcoming those odds to discover that they have common ground.
Ooh, I like that.
Yep, agreed.
How does rivals to lovers differ from enemies to lovers? Because there is a bit of distinction between the two.
Yeah, it's really funny because in the notes that I had written down common ground as a difference between enemies to lovers and rivals to lovers. Because for enemies, they don't necessarily need that common ground, but for rivals, they are typically passionate or at the very least involved in the same thing. So like rival soccer players, for example, they're already both passionate about soccer. That is something that they can bond over despite their differences. And then the other note that I had written down, which is really funny given what Luna said, is that I wrote it's often lighter. They're not necessarily fighting to the death. Then again, Luna has rival assassins. So, maybe take that with a grain of salt.
They can still bond.
Each other, they're fighting to kill the same person.
Yeah, there's still, death involved. But I feel like rivals to lovers stories are often a little lower stakes, which I guess makes sense given that I wrote Rival Most Vile, which is just about potion shops. But yeah, it doesn't have to be, and again, like Sarah was saying, it doesn't have to be the whole world is between them and they hate each other's guts and want each other to die. I think that's a key difference there.
It's funny you say that, actually, because I hadn't thought about this until you just said it. But I do seem to feel like, in my experience of reading them, Rivals to Lovers tends to show up a lot more in the sort of cozy fantasy type books. Whereas the Enemies to Lover is a lot more sort of the epic fantasy or like the romantasy side of things. But I actually Googled it before I came on here because, like, do I understand the difference? And Rivals really was about having the same end goal. So either achieving the same thing or working towards the same goal. Whereas I think the Enemies, it's opposing sides of something. So that's probably why it falls better into sort of the sort of epic fantasy or romantasy side of things, is they want different things. And then it's about finding that balance and that middle ground. Whereas Rivals, it's about achieving the same thing together. That was my understanding.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And I think it's less hate, more animosity, or just there's that banter. You're kind of picking at the other person, but really secretly admiring them. Like, oh, wait, where was I going with this? But yeah, and it's more fun to play with. And I find it a lot in like mystery books, like two partners put together that would never actually work together, but they end up being really good. Like, that's one of the things I really love about it.
See? Delicious.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that's funny that we all have like kind of pinpointed where we see, like just within our own reading, kind of the differences with it. Because in my mind, like I go completely out of fantasy when I think mostly of rivals to lovers. I go to like I read, hockey romance. And that to me is just like, that's the trope, right? That's the thing that like drives all of those stories, is because I don't think it's necessarily enemies, because they are working towards a common goal. They're either teammates or they're working closely together, and it's just kind of that perfect setup. So my mind goes completely out of fantasy. And then like Luna said, epic fantasies and stuff like that really lend itself to the enemies to lovers end.
It's the drama.
Right.
And for me, I don't know if I have anything that's unique after everyone else gave their excellent points, but I think for me, the key difference, like Luna was saying, I think Rivals to Lovers lends itself more to coziness, even if whether it's a cozy fantasy, or like a contemporary situation. Yeah. And like we discussed before, I feel like Rivals has more, the distinction is that they have common ground and like a shared goal that they have that they won't acknowledge. So. Favorite Rivals to Lovers books that we would recommend?
Everyone just looks at Becca.
Yeah, I know.
For real.
I was like, who's going to say that?
So mine is it's a weird one, but like, hear me out on it. And it's The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, because it's about two magicians who raise apprentices with the intention of setting the apprentices out to kill each other, which sounds like enemies to lovers, but the apprentices never really actually want to kill each other. This wasn't their own goal, it's their master's goal. So they spend so much of the book just admiring the other's magical abilities and just sort of like showing off for each other that it feels more like rivals to lovers. And also, this is just mainly an excuse for me to talk about the night circus because it's one of my. So there you go. Thank you for indulging me.
Mine's another hear me out one. Okay, because I had to really think about this because most of what I've read is probably more enemies to lovers. And I was like, have I read anything that's rivals? And I have. So hear me out. So Maz Maddox has done a series about dinosaur shifters, right?
Beautiful. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing, right? And in book 4, there's 2 men, it's books, and they're both trying to get this particular fossil, and they work for kind of like different companies, and they want different things. They want this fossil for different reasons, but they end up kind of working together to get the fossil from, quote, the bad guys. And it's just so delicious. The banter and like the interaction between the two, because one is very like calm, cool and collected, and the other guy is just he's really gets flustered really easily, he gets really anxious, he sort of flaps about a little bit, and them working together is just perfection. And it's so good, and I can't recommend it enough.
I love it.
I forgot all about that one, and that is such a good one too for it.
Yeah, that's your fault. I read them for you.
Yeah, they're good, okay?
They're so good.
And I wonder if there's any that don't revolve around, say, like a profession. Like it sounds like all the things we're bringing up, it's like things like like jobs or hobbies or things that people do. Like there's no rivalry on a personal level so far, and I just find that interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. So my recommendations are both professional ones.
Yeah.
Mine is a little different.
Ooh.
Okay. So for me, getting on a sidetrack again. I really enjoyed The Wolf at the Door by Charlie Adhara, and that is one of those mystery books where 2 unlikely people are put together and they have to work together and solve a case, and they would never be together otherwise, and they're rivals for different reasons. But I really enjoyed that, and like it was kind of comforting and safe to know like he's not the bad guy. Like I just didn't want that kind of book, and they just had a safer vibe to it, even though we're hunting for murderers. But it was still good. And of course, the other one is Arrival Most Vile. I think that one is like the most well done. And I don't want to say like, because it's not, I don't know. It is what it is. It's just, it's Arrival Most Vile. It's about rivals. And it's just so well done. And there's not, you know exactly what you're getting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so mine is one of the books from the Lords of Bucknall Club. It's the 3rd book in the series. They can all be read out of order, but I read them in order, and I think I would recommend it that way, honestly. But the book is called Arrival for Rivington, and it is basically 2 young men who is a Regency romance. They are about to make their debut into society at the same time, the same year, and they both have their eye on the same man that they would like to marry to secure their futures and their wealth and everything. Honestly, it's one of the funniest books I've ever read in my life. But ultimately, after fighting over this same man who's has zero interest in either one of them, they end up together at the end of the story. And it is hilarious. It is so fun. But I thought it was, to your point, Noah, it's like one of those things where you're not expecting them to be fighting over like a human being, like a person. Yeah. That's their rivalry. It's just kind of like who's going to be the better, like, you know, spouse for this one person. And unfortunately, that person has no interest in either of them, but then they ultimately find what they're looking for in each other. And it's so sweet.
When in a time when marriage is so important, like a Regency period is a good era for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. Because they're not just like, you know, oh, he's cute. No, this is very important to them. This secures their future and their wealth and everything else. So very important in their lives to them. So that's why there is a rivalry. It's not just like, oh, don't steal my crush, you know, that kind of thing. It's there's very high stakes attached to it, but ultimately it works out for them. So
before I go into my recommendation, I'm actually going to add, like, I've been thinking about it, and like Briespells and Bridegrooms, their rivalry isn't really based on a profession, and it's barely based on a hobby, in that like Roger's hobby is magic, but Wynn's isn't. So
yeah,
and their rivalry is more out of their school days, where they just were like school rivals, kind of.
Well,
not really, but like then they grow up and they try to one up each other.
Yeah, Wynn's just a jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when they grow up, it's more of like a rivalry via paper where they're just trying to trash talk each other in the paper. So
Yeah.
my recommendations, also Arrival Most Vile by R.K. Ashwick. It is excellent. And also Natural Enemies by Rowan Parrish, which might be one of the first Rivals to Lovers I've ever read. I think it's possible that the author would categorize it as enemies to lovers given the name, but it's two botanists. One is science-based botanist in like a lab, and the other one is like community garden botanist, and they kind of squabble and then they fall in love, and it's a novella and it's super cute, so highly recommend.
All of these sound so great.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It sounds so cute.
It's so cute. It's one of my earliest queer romances I read, I think. But yeah. Any other thoughts on Rivals to Lovers?
I just wanted to say, Noah said something really nice about picking up a book and kind of knowing that one of the characters like wouldn't be a bad guy. And I think that's another really fun part about Rivals to Lovers is that, particularly if you have dual PV, you know, like the antagonist isn't. It feels like a safer read because you know that it's not like an evil villain on the other like side of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
And I feel like with Enemies to Lovers, it can be kind of tricky because I feel like Enemies to Lovers makes most sense to me personally when it's like an epic fantasy situation where it's like rival kingdoms or something, or two different cultures that have been at war for years. Those make sense to me for Enemies to Lovers, but so often, like, I think they really have to have good reason to hate each other at the beginning, whereas Rivals, I think it's a little bit of a softer angle going in because there doesn't have to be that level of animosity from the start, which I like.
Yeah. The wall can be a little bit lower and you can still get away with it. Because I feel like that's always the trouble with at least writing like any kind of opposition to lovers is that the wall has to be high enough to justify the opposition, but low enough for them to reasonably get over.
Yes. It's a tricky balance.
And I mean, I always get in the mood for Enemies to Lovers. Not that I don't like it, but it's just nice to know, you know, if you're not in the mood for it, you know that there's something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, listeners. This has been... Holy cats, my brain. Thank you, listeners. This has been Right Here, Right Queer, talking about Rivals to Lovers. Thank you for listening, and we will see you all next time.